Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 30th of March. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 401 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then we can watch an interview with Scotland's new Independence Minister. Then I'll introduce our guest for this evening, and together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russian authorities have arrested a US journalist working in the country and have accused him of espionage, a charge that could carry a prison sentence of up to 20 years. Evan Gershkovich, a well-respected reporter from the Wall Street Journal, was detained on Wednesday during a reporting trip to the city in the Urals of Ekaterinburg. The US is deeply concerned over Gershkovich's detention. The State Department has been in direct touch with the Russian government over the journalist's detention, including actively working to secure consular access to him, the White House has confirmed. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will chair a UN Security Council meeting in April when Russia assumes the international body's presidency. Russia's coming UN Security Council presidency was the worst joke ever for April Fool's Day, said Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and a stark reminder that something is wrong with the way international security architecture is functioning. Turkey's parliament approved a bill on Thursday to allow Finland to join NATO, clearing the way for the country to become part of the Western Defence Alliance as war rages in Ukraine. The Turkish parliament was the last among the 30 members of the alliance to ratify Finland's membership after Hungary's legislature approved a similar bill earlier this week. And Vladimir Putin has signed a decree to call up 147,000 Russian citizens for statutory military service as part of the country's spring conscription campaign, Russian state media has reported. The Russian leader last signed a routine conscription campaign in September, calling up at that time a further 120,000 citizens for statutory military service. Now, earlier today, we were lucky enough to be joined by Jamie Hepburn MSP, who has recently been appointed the Minister for Independence in the new Scottish Government. And so now let's have a look at that interview from a little bit earlier today. Jamie's been the MSP for Cumbernauld and Kilsyth since 2011, and before that he was the list MSP for Central Scotland from 2007. Jamie, you've served in numerous roles with the Scottish Government. You were Minister for Sports, then Minister for Employability and Training, Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills, and then Minister for Higher Education and Further Education up until the 29th of March when you took a call from, I presume, from Mr. Yousaf's office. How surprised were you to get that call?
Well, to get the chance to serve in government in any role is a privilege, and you take nothing for granted. So, whenever there's a reshuffle, you may be in, you may not be. And naturally, I was delighted to get the call to be asked to continue to serve in government. Then, when I was told it was the particular role I have now, I was obviously very delighted to be able to respond to that call and accept the offer to serve as the First Minister's Minister for Independence.
Thanks, Jamie. And I should say many congratulations on this latest appointment in the list
Thank
of
you.
appointments you've had in the Scottish Government. We're told that you are set to report directly to the First Minister, as well as work closely with the Constitution Secretary, Angus Robertson. So that sounds like two reporting lines, as you might say in business. How's that going to work?
So I'm one of the First Minister's junior ministers. I'll be working directly to him. But, as with any ministerial colleagues, we work right across government. We work collegiately. And of course, given Angus Robertson's responsibilities as the Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, it'll be a particular close working relationship there. So I know Angus well. We've worked together before, and I'm clearly looking forward to continue to have that opportunity. But my role will be to work with all of my ministerial colleagues to make sure that we continue to prosecute the case for independence. Of course, we have that mandate. We got that mandate in 2021 at the Scottish Parliament election to be able to take forward that case, continue to make the case. And that's exactly what I'll be doing in this ministerial role.
Thanks, Jamie. It could be said that until now, the First Minister was the Minister for Independence, I suppose, in a similar way that Rishi Sunak styles himself as the Minister for the Union. But now the discrete role of a Minister for Independence is an innovation by Mr. Youssef. Given that it's a new role, what's the job description that you've agreed? And in light of a job description, how will we measure performance in this role? And I suppose, I suppose part of that is, do you intend to deliver independence whilst you're in post?
Well, look, I may be the Minister for Independence in terms of the titular role, but just to assure you, every single Scottish Government minister is a Minister for Independence. That's why we are all in it. We're all in it to win it in terms of the case for Scottish independence. In that regard, it's not really about me as an individual delivering it. We're the government. We're part of a wider movement, and it's only going to be delivered collectively. We can only win this as a collective movement. So I'm looking forward to working with colleagues in government, with colleagues in Parliament. Parliament's plural. We'll be working with our MPs as well, with our council groups, the length and breadth of the country, and indeed the wider party and the wider movement, because it's our strength is working collectively, pulling in the same direction, and working towards winning independence.
Thanks, Jamie. It's an interesting point that you make there with regard to collective working. Having gone through a leadership election, which is not something that many serving politicians in the SNP have experienced, given that the last contested election was 16 more years ago. The What's your view about the and whilst it was a very robust and dynamic leadership election campaign, inevitably positions have been taken, and some people are very disappointed and some people are very delighted. How big do you think the challenge is of bringing bringing the party, let alone bringing a movement back together again, in order that there is more collective working?
Well, I should say, in terms of your first comment, I'm long enough in the tooth in terms of my active involvement in the SNP that this was not the first experience I had of going through a leadership election. Look, any leadership contest is going to be to a greater, larger degree robust. There's going to be an exchange of ideas. There's going to be an exchange of opinions. The important thing is you go through that. Someone is elected, and then you get behind the leader and you work collectively, because frankly, the party, the SNP, the wider independence movement is bigger than any one individual, and we must work collectively, pull together, and work in the direction of making sure that we get out there, we make the case for independence, we have a strong case to make, get out there speaking to people, and win them over, and get us across the line, and establish Scotland as an independent country.
Thanks, Jamie. As you say, the question of getting out there, I think when you spoke to the National, you said that the country has a strong case for self-determination, but it's the government's responsibility to instill confidence in undecided voters that Scotland's ready to leave the UK. And you said that you'd spoken about this during the leadership contest, and that the primary responsibility as a movement right now is to be out there speaking with folks and campaigning on the ground. It's really necessary to keep campaigning going. Now, there's two aspects to that I wanted to touch on with you. Firstly, many have been campaigning since 2012. That's more than 10 years. These are activists, not politicians, I'm referring to. I think there's a significant number who are either exhausted or disillusioned, or both. So how, in terms of bringing the collective together, how's that going to be addressed?
Well, look, I am in the privileged and fortunate position to be an elected representative for the SNP, and also to be a member of a minister within the Scottish government. But first and foremost, I have been, continue to be, and will be an activist for independence. I've been campaigning for this since I was 18 years old, which was not yesterday, unfortunately. So I've been campaigning for over 20 years, over 2 decades. So, I understand that perspective. I understand that, people might feel they've been going at it for a long time. In saying that, though, I'm not seeking to ignore the fact that, countless numbers of people have been doing that and continue to do that. I think that's commendable. I think it's welcome. I suppose it's a message to the entirety of the movement, to those who have been engaged in campaigning, but who've maybe drifted off. Come back on board, come back and get involved, because, frankly, it's only out there on, community by community, street by street, doorstep by doorstep, that we are going to be able to make the case and win the case for independence. It's not talking amongst ourselves, it's talking to other people, it's talking to those who are not yet persuaded of the case for independence, and engaging with them, listening to them, seeking to reassure them, to understand what their concerns it might be, to respond to them. And it's only through that type of activity that we're going to establish Scotland as an independent country.
Thanks, Jamie. And you're talking there about reassurance and engagement with voters, and you'd spoken about confidence going to be instilled in no voters. Now, those no voters in quick succession since 2014 have witnessed the omni shambles of Brexit, a pandemic, the war in Ukraine, a war in Europe, and a really serious cost of living crisis, all in very quick succession. So how do you think the movement and the party are going to go about reassuring and engaging with those people who, to a greater or lesser extent, are in a state of shock?
Well, we live in uncertain times. I absolutely recognise that. And, one of the things, I'm sure you would have encountered it as well during the period of the referendum, was that, people are naturally, by instinct, sometimes a bit nervous about the process of change, which can be uncertain. And I understand that, and that's why we've got to speak to folk to understand it better and to offer reassurance. But my core message to people out there is, can we afford not to be an independent country? Quite often the question is, and you'll have heard this as well, can Scotland afford to be independent? I flip it on its head. If you look at the disaster zone that we have in terms of a UK government that has wreaked social and economic havoc on the people of Scotland, then the question really should be, can we afford not to be independent? Now, that is something that we need to distill into a clear message. That's something we need to take out there. And that's something we need to prosecute with the people of Scotland, because we're clearly not quite there yet, and that will require careful engagement, considered engagement, to make sure that we take people with us.
Thanks, Jamie. And one final question, moving back to local politics. We saw protests yesterday regarding the proposed pay cut by North Lanarkshire Council with regard to their early years workers. Previously, you said you were alarmed to hear that the most senior early years workers have recently been informed that they'll be moving down 2 full pay grades or offered voluntary redundancy. So in terms of what's happening, what are you hearing from your constituents, and what's happening on the ground, and what do you think the Scottish Government could or should do to address this situation?
Well, naturally, what I've heard is concerning to me. There's a process in which the council seems to be engaged in downgrading people's roles within the early years learning and childcare sector in North Lanarkshire, and that's going to consequentially impact on their income. So I've had constituents who are directly impacted as a consequence of that, those who work in the sector, also some parents who are concerned. So I'm engaging with the council to try and understand the process that's been engaged in, but fundamentally to ask them to look at this again. Ultimately, this is a matter for North Lanarkshire Council to resolve, and I'll be keeping up the pressure on them to rethink the decision that they seem to have made.
Thanks, Jamie. Jamie Hepburn, MSP, Minister for Independence, thank you very much for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening.
Pleasure.
Now, there we are with the interview with Jamie Hepburn that we recorded a little while ago. We're lucky enough to be joined today by Kat Cary. Kat is a political analyst. She's a parliamentary staffer at Holyrood. She's co-convener of SNP Socialists. She's on the communications team for Democrats Abroad and is a member of Global Women's Caucus. And of course, before all of that, Kat served in the US Navy for more than a dozen years. Kat, how are you keeping?
I'm well. I'm very happy for this election contest to be over and looking forward to the future.
Well, thank you for joining us today on Broadcasting Scotland, Kat. We watched and listened to the interview with Jamie Hepburn there. Jamie has said that his main responsibility will be to marshal the arguments for independence within government and to ensure the case continues to be made. And he added, it will primarily be about making sure that we continue to marshal the arguments within government. Now, marshalling the arguments within government, what do you think that's going to mean in practice? And perhaps, in a sense, even more importantly, if it's within government, will any of that be visible to voters or independent supporters?
I think you're right to point that out because there's plenty of questions asked about independence in Parliament from supporting parties, from unionist parties. Um, Douglas Ross's first question to Humza Yousaf at First Minister's Questions was about independence. So I think that similar to how the COVID recovery portfolio was, how there's some coordination across portfolios, I see the independence minister as making sure that the proper things are being tied to independence and seeing what we can campaign on and making sure that the message is strong, coordinated, and efficient. I think that's a really good move, but you're right to point it out that it is not going to be Jamie Hepburn's job to come and leaflet with all of us. Like may well come and leaflet with plenty of branches, but his role is within the government.
That's a good explanation. Thanks, Kat. And in terms of a little bit more context, Nicola Sturgeon was always very clear that Margaret Thatcher and Thatcherite politics brought Nicola into politics. Now, it struck me that Jamie was born a couple of weeks after Mrs. Thatcher came to power. Now, this week, Humza Yousaf has used the phrase, this will be the generation that delivers independence. So how do you think this generation is different to the generations of Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond before her? Is the difference simply demographics? The younger you are, the more likely you are to support Scottish independence? Or do you think is there more to it than that?
I think there's a little bit, I think there's reasons why younger people are more likely to support independence. So to unpick that a little bit, uh, I moved from grassroots CS stuff to the S&P after a few years of talking about currency, talking about land reform, talking about economics. And I think that's really important, but it wasn't fulfilling me. So I think I'm more of Humza Yousaf and Jamie Hepburn's generation. I might be a few years older than both of them, but um, I do think that some people are worried about their pensions, and that's absolutely fair and good. But I do think that there's younger generations that want to aspire to progressive policies and setting out how Scotland is different already from the UK, but the UK is holding us back, and what we need is, to put forward a vision and instead of fear-based. Not that the campaign has been fear-based completely before, but I think that just by function of being younger people are willing to take more risks and to say, look, we got the resources, the other stuff will sort itself out. I'm a ways from my pension. So let's talk about that. So I think that we're not going to abandon those talks, but I do think that though it doesn't drive me, it doesn't inspire me to get out on the street and talk to people about it, currency, economy, stuff like that, as much as here's how we're different, here's how you're worth more, here's how you're worth more as an immigrant, a woman, somebody who was raised working class. That's what I see: racial justice, LGBT justice, things like that.
Thanks, Kat. That's a great explanation. And I'm sure we're looking forward to hearing more, both from the First Minister and the new Minister for Independence, as to how those roles are going to work in practice. But let's move on now, because the First Minister chaired the first meeting of his new Scottish Cabinet this morning in Bute House, charging Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers to take a bold approach to delivering for Scotland. Cabinet had a substantive discussion on the priorities of the government, ahead of the First Minister giving a planned statement to Parliament immediately after recess. They had a further conversation around the budget that will underpin those priorities. This morning's discussion highlighted the importance of being an open, accessible government through engagement with the public and stakeholders, and by reaching out to members of other parties in a genuine spirit of collaboration. It also stressed the importance of building relationships with counterparts in other devolved administrations and the UK government. The First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, and the Minister for Local Government Empowerment will be meeting with the President of COSLA this afternoon. Cabinet members also reflected on their experiences in their previous ministerial portfolios and how that often brings useful perspective when taking on roles in different areas of government. As always, a discussion on the immediate issues Cabinet members will be addressing in the coming weeks also took place. Commenting, the First Minister Humza Yousaf said, "I was pleased to welcome new and returning Cabinet members to our first meeting this morning. I was clear to them that I want Cabinet to be a forum for open and honest discussion. We all look forward to reaching out to stakeholders, the business community, opposition parties, and the wider public in a spirit of genuine collaboration." So, Kat, in general terms, first of all, what's your overall impression of the new Scottish Government Cabinet, which met for the first time this morning?
I'm really excited about the new cabinet. I'm a little bit disappointed. There's a few heartbreakers in there. There always are, but I don't think that there's hard feelings. One person that I really wanted to still see in justice was Keith Brown, but I do think that Angela Constance is going to be brilliant with her background as a justice social worker. So, Keith is talking about focusing on being deputy leader of the party, and I think that's really important. I think Jenny Gilbruth will do amazing in education. Sorry about that, education. Michael Matheson has a background as an occupational therapist, and he's running health now. Shirley Ann Somerville is social justice, and that's something that she had done previously, so it'll be nice to have taking over from Shona Robinson, somebody who has already transitioned with her, and it seems like it will be pretty smooth for a brief that's going to be quite rough. Not rough, but there's a lot to do in that brief going forward.
Thanks, Kat. That's some great perspective, and I'm sure you and I will be discussing the performance of the new and returning cabinet ministers and ministers in the Scottish Cabinet over the next few weeks and months on Broadcasting Scotland. We'll move on now, because the UK has joined the 11-member strong Asia-Pacific trade bloc that includes Japan and Australia after nearly 2 years of negotiations. The deal, part of a push to agree worldwide trade deals after Brexit, secures access for British exporters to half a billion people in the 11-member Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. The agreement, secured after 21 months of talks, will allow exporters to seize opportunities for new jobs, growth and innovation, the UK government said. Spanning Canada, Mexico, Japan, Australia, Vietnam and Malaysia, the CPTPP is expected to be ratified by the UK Parliament and those of the other 11 member states later this year. The UK government said the deal, which will cut tariffs on exports of food, drink and cars, would generate about £1.8 billion of extra income once it has been up and running for 10 years. And that's about 0.08% of the UK's annual gross national product. Unions condemned clauses in the deal that will allow large companies to sue the UK government behind closed doors if they believe their profits have suffered from changes to laws or regulations. The TUC's General Secretary, Paul Nowak, said, "This deal allows multinational corporations to sue the UK government in secret courts for introducing policies which threaten their profits. This could include an increase in the minimum wage or bringing energy companies back into public ownership." Responding to the CPTPP deal announcement, Scottish Government Trade Minister Richard Lochhead MSP said, "It is clear that this agreement will not make up for the damaging impact of the UK leaving the EU and forfeiting access to the European single market, which accounted for 43% of Scottish exports prior to Brexit." He went on, "Membership of the CPTPP will see some reduction in tariffs, which Scottish businesses will welcome. However, the UK government's own modelling suggests that over time, CPTPP membership will result in a mere 0.08% increase in UK GDP. In contrast, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that Brexit will reduce the UK's potential growth by about 4%. So, Kat, firstly, some trade experts said that joining this bloc, the CPTPP, would harm the UK's ability to rejoin the EU at a later date, arguing that harmonising trade rules with the CPTPP countries will drive a wedge between Brussels and London. So is that what this is really about? The amounts of money involved are comparatively small. So this is really about permanently disconnecting Brexit Island from our friends and neighbours in Europe, no matter the cost and no matter the damage.
I agree. I'm not sure that that was the driving purpose. I think that there's a lot of concerning things about this deal. Driving a wedge is a great way to put it between Brussels and London. But I do think there's a need to have trading partners for the UK. So anything was probably on the table. So was this because they wanted to make Brexit permanent? I think Brexit for the UK is already permanent. But I think you're absolutely correct to point out that this kind of killed it for those who are holding out hope.
Yes, thanks, Kat. And unions, as I said, unions have condemned clauses in the deal that will allow large companies to sue the UK government behind closed doors if they believe their profits have suffered from changes to laws or regulations. Now, it struck me when I was reading that this also sounds rather like the behind closed doors operation of Westminster's Internal Markets Act, which is intended to regulate the way in which Scotland operates some of its markets if they're operated in a manner that is different to other parts of the UK. So is that why the CPTPP is so attractive to Tories? Because it allows them to ignore the democratic wishes of voters.
Again, I think that it is a bonus, and we shouldn't discount that. But this is earlier versions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a big point of contention in Democratic presidential elections, with Bernie Sanders being very much against it. And he quite rightly pointed out that there's concerns around how climate efficient that these countries are running things, sweatshops and other sort of things that aren't respecting or recognizing workers' rights. I think the Tories are looking at something that they can invest in themselves, the wealthier Tories, and quite on brand to line their own pockets.
Absolutely, I think that's a very fair assessment of the situation. As ever, it's about following the money and about following the money that's in the hands of those who are the wealthiest, as a fundamental part of Westminster politics at the moment. But let's move on now, because the Eurozone's annual inflation rate fell sharply in March as plunging energy prices eased pressure on the cost of living across 20 countries that use the euro. Amid signs that upward pressure on prices is easing, the EU's statistical agency Eurostat said that the headline inflation rate dropped from 8.5% in February to 6.9% this month. The fall was because of the sharp increase in gas prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine not being repeated this year. As a result, annual energy inflation dropped from 13.7% to minus 0.9%. In contrast to falling gas prices, the cost of food continued to rise for Eurozone consumers. Eurostat said food, tobacco and alcoholic drinks were 15.4% more expensive in March than 12 months earlier, compared to a 15% annual rise in February. Core inflation, the cost of living excluding items such as fuel and food, rose slightly from 5.6% to a new European record of 5.7%. Analysts said that the European Central Bank was likely to pay more attention to core inflation than the headline measure of the cost of living and would, as a result, would continue to raise interest rates. Inflation data for the UK for March has not yet been published, but figures for February showed headline inflation rising from 10.1% to 10.4%, while core inflation rose from 5.8% to 6.2%. So, Kat, firstly, the rate at which the cost of living is rocketing for everybody, the rate at which it's increasing may have slowed down, but the cost of living is still going up. Have you come across anything coming down in price?
Not yet. No, I really haven't. And what you rightly pointed out is that food is still going to be on the rise. And, you know, I'm not an economics expert, but I do know inflation comes from lack of product, with with profiteering or with kind of printing money and devaluing of your money, which is what usually some governments that don't want to give payments to people to help them out will say, we'll devalue our money, and that it can become a vicious cycle. But I think this really points out that while there is the lack of goods basis for this inflation, because the energy prices went down, there's less profiteering available because we just got all these notices that all the oil and gas, the energy companies made record profits. So there's still profiteering going on, but there is still a core to that inflation that is about lack of goods. It's about, which means that we just need to put money in people's pockets and try and get through this, which is quite a daunting prospect in Scotland.
Thanks, Kat. And whilst it's recognised, and it's been repeated this week, but it's recognised that the Scottish Government has only very limited powers to address the cost of living crisis for people living in Scotland. What do you think that the new First Minister should be doing about the cost of living crisis within those limited powers?
Well, his first act, one of his first acts as First Minister, was to raise the energy assistance fund and allow more of that. But I think that we do need to see some kind of assistance for food and other staples like that. There's a lot to do. Scotland doesn't have the power to instill a windfall tax because energy is reserved, and Scotland can't, the First Minister can't do away with no recourse to public funds. That's a UK program, and a lot of these programs are not available to people like me who are no recourse to public funds, which, you know, I'm doing okay. We're still heating the house when we need to, but there are people that are asylum seekers, refugees, and people who genuinely can't afford it, and I worry a lot. There's a lot of warm banks where people can go where it's cold, but we're also seeing library closures in places like Aberdeen where people use those as a warm hub. So I think that this is going to take a lot. There's no quick fixes. It's going to have to be endemic in what the First Minister does going forward.
Thanks, Kat. Now then, news from across the Atlantic has been breaking all day today, and so we should move on to that now, because a grand jury has voted to indict Donald Trump in New York over a hush money payment made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential election. No former US president has ever been criminally indicted. The news is set to shake the race for the Republican presidential nomination in 2024, in which Trump leads most polls. This evening, we contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender to the Manhattan DA's office for arraignment on a Supreme Court indictment, which remains under seal, said a statement from the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg's spokesperson. Guidance will be provided when the arraignment date is selected. Trump was expected to appear in court for his arraignment on Tuesday, Trump's lawyer, Susan Nichelle, said. At that point, he would enter a plea on the charges. New York's police have been told to all report for duty today and be prepared to deal with unusual disorder, according to a memo seen by NBC. It is unclear whether Trump will be handcuffed for his appearance, but he will be fingerprinted, photographed and processed for a felony arrest. His legal team is expected to vigorously fight the charges, and a timeline for a potential trial remains unclear. Trump, who is reportedly facing up to 30 counts of business fraud, attacked Bragg and the Democrats in a statement released shortly after the news broke, claiming that the indictment amounted to political persecution. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden, Trump said. Our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden. Democrats responded to Trump's claims of persecution, saying that if Trump broke the law, he should face charges, just like any American. The Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer added, there should be no outside political influence, intimidation, or interference in this case. I encourage Mr. Trump's critics and supporters to let the process proceed peacefully and according to the law. California Democrat Adam Schiff said, the indictment of a former president is unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been involved. So, Kat, firstly, as I say, Chuck Schumer said, I encourage Trump's critics and supporters to let the process proceed peacefully and according to law. Now, it strikes me that Mr. Trump's supporters did not proceed peacefully when they attempted to sack the Capitol building and threatened to hang Mike Pence. So what do you think are the prospects for a peaceful response this time to the capo di tutti being indicted by the grand jury? And I see this afternoon that Marjorie Taylor Greene has says, I'm going to New York on Tuesday. We must protest this unconstitutional witch hunt.
I do think that the arraignment is set for Tuesday, but it's not set in stone. If I was the one setting that timeline, I would also have everyone on standby and to try and not have it announced so that there can be people that gather, whether they be politicians that are infamous or people like the January 6th rioters. A lot of people were at not a lot, but there were several people at the rally before the January 6th thing and we're like, oh no, what did we get into? And added to the numbers with the more dangerous people. So I think Chuck Schumer was right. I think one of the biggest GOP attack lines is that this is politically driven, which is quite rich, I think. But I do think that we need to let this process play out. What I expect is that he'll be arrested at a time where he's not quite ready for it. I'm willing to admit that I look forward to seeing the mugshot, and then he will offer his plea or see if he can get a plea deal. But I think that this is something that's maybe more concrete that they have and has less of a political judgment call, because the payment that went out to Stormy Daniels was money that was allegedly laundered through his campaign. So that's how they bring down mob bosses. Historically, that's how they actually catch people. I think it should probably be noted that there's several ongoing investigations, incitement of January 6th, election subversion, the classified documents. There's a defamation trial set to go against him, and there's also a state election interference ongoing investigation in Georgia. So that's probably not an exhaustive list, but he's facing more and more of these. I think this one came first because it is more of a cut and dried money laundering sort of deal.
That's a very fair point, Kat. Cut and dried, certainly, insofar as Mike Cohen, his attorney, has already been convicted in connection with the payment to Stormy Daniels. So yes, it would appear that it is more cut and dried in that sense. Excuse me. The California Democrat Adam Schiff said the indictment of a former president is unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been engaged. Within hours of the news, Trump's campaign sent out fundraising pleas to counter what it called the darkest chapter in American history. It accused the Democrats of weaponizing the justice system to punish a political opponent. Now, insofar as fundraising pleas were sent out within hours, that's the tell. That's what this is always about with Trump, isn't it? Raising money. And of course, that's what this indictment is about, paying off a woman with money raised from from political campaign supporters.
Yeah, I think you're quite right to point that out, because I think one of Trump's lawyer team or his spokesperson said this isn't legitimate because he would have paid her hush money anyways had he not been running for president. Well, that's not the problem. The problem is the illegal campaign funds. I think that possibly um, he's not really sure how to pay out money with legitimate means, which, not that that's okay to do anyways. That is definitely um, it's not a good look. It's not something that an ethical person would do, in my opinion. But I do think that it's just more of the same from him. You're absolutely right. I think Donald Trump has been very clever to raise money off of anything and everything that he's ever been in contact with. Um, so I just kind of feel sorry for the people who have been duped to send him a lot of money.
Absolutely, and do you think you were listing in part the various legal travails that are lining up or queuing up at Trump Towers for the former president? Do you think that that as these legal procedures play out, and more time we see Trump in the company of his lawyers, as you say, bugshots, maybe even in handcuffs at one point? Do you think that's going to begin to have an effect upon the polling that we're seeing in the run-up to the nomination for the US presidential campaign in 2024?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it will activate diehard supporters. But I do think that um, Trump's nomination last time was unexpected, and it was because he was in a crowded field. I think that it's very difficult to talk about the Republican establishment as the good guys for me. But I do think that there are people who are conservative that I disagree with, who aren't criminal or insane. So I think that they are planning um, to, Ron DeSantis has not announced he's running. Nikki Haley has. Nikki Haley is somebody who I disagree with on a lot of political things, but I don't think she wants to rip the country apart. So I think that there are very smart political strategists who are not on Trump's side, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, and we will see, as ever with Trump. The only predictable thing is the unpredictable, and so I'm sure that we'll be returning to this story as his legal travails continue, probably throughout this year and well into next year. But I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 in order that we can continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you will also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back on Sunday at 12 noon for the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everybody who's been watching us this evening, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, Kat Cary. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
On this day in 1296, King Edward I attacked Berwick upon Tweed. Accounts differ, but some 2/3 of the population of the town, perhaps 12,000 men, women and children, were killed. The Scots under William Wallace retaliated in kind, setting fire to Hexham Priory and destroying shrines, books, relics and killing people there. I'd like to thank you for watching this evening. I hope that you have a very peaceful weekend. Bye-bye.